This is Ken Beers with Boxford Life Sciences. In this presentation, I will introduce software to analyze drug development economics called Python Pharmaceutical ForeCasting, or PPFC. As is well known, drug R&D is costly and risky, with the industry realizing a return on invested capital well below its historical 10 to 12% cost of capital. Economic analysis is thus a critical part of setting development strategy. Today, R&D programs are typically assessed via a process such as shown here. First, when preclinical leads are ready to progress to the clinic, clinical frames several options for where to position a drug for use and drafts evidence generation plans to support them. These options are translated to target product profiles that the new product team, working with commercial, market access, and other stakeholders, assess for economic value. This is done by asking physicians and payers how they would use and reimburse a drug, if approved, that has this product profile. This market research feeds a forecast model of the sales to be expected. These sales forecasts are combined with estimates of incremental commercial costs to support the product and of the costs and timelines of the development program. Development risk is described by assigning success probabilities to each stage, generally from the historical success rates of analogous drugs. Finally, this view of the risk, value, and capital requirements of the program are set against other internal R&D programs and external BD&L opportunities in the context of the broader vision for the franchise or company. And this is used to make the final decision of whether to proceed to the clinic or not, and if so, which clinical program to pursue. These economic analyses are increasingly challenged, however. Development programs may span many diseases and positionings defined by prior treatment history or biomarkers. They compete in these indications with an increasing number of inline and pipeline therapies. This means that there are many evidence, go-to-market, lifecycle management, portfolio, and M&A options to consider, each perhaps modeled slightly differently by independent teams. Where the clinical program design clearly drives the economic opportunity, the converse is also true, but this may be missed with the sequential TPP handoff from clinical to commercial. Within the bounds of ethical, clinical, and regulatory constraints, we should be seeking the clinical program that maximizes the expected value of return on investment. The many clinical and commercial factors that govern the opportunity for a drug are highly uncertain. Experience says that it's safer to factor in these uncertainties when seeking optimal strategies rather than ignore them. And as we have more complex and uncertain landscapes, we are tempted to oversimplify our analysis, or the increased modeling workload leads to errors as tiny as a missing dollar sign in an Excel formula that nevertheless can lead to misvaluing assets by hundreds of millions of dollars. These challenges point to the need for an analysis framework that scales well to complex and uncertain markets and that takes human effort and potential for error out of the workflow. This approach would free us to focus on market understanding and strategy, yielding more rapid and interactive decision cycles. Python Pharmaceutical ForeCasting, or PPFC, is software designed to meet this need. There are four main components shown here. At left, we can use the software to describe clinical development programs and future market evolution in such a way to explore automatically the many outcomes that may occur. We use this model of development uncertainty and forecast and valuation models for assets that may be drugs or portfolios of drugs. To generate these models, we merely describe the market dynamics in the diseases and segments where our asset is used. The software then builds the model for us and presents an easy-to-use graphic user interface to run it. Where we can still use analogs for the success probability, duration, and cost of our clinical trials, PPFC can estimate these assumptions from simulating digital trends of clinical trials. We set the patient-level response on our comparator and a prior belief in a treatment effect, and the protocol and site network that we use for the trial. The software then simulates many random trial outcomes to estimate the resulting risk, duration, and cost, assumptions that are incorporated into our broader development path. This allows an integrated clinical and commercial view of our R&D programs to make better trade-offs between program investments and resulting revenues. Finally, decisions about internal R&D programs and new product commercialization are closely linked to external BD&L opportunities or to the pursuit of out-licensing deals that allow early-stage companies to de-risk their positions and reduce the capital requirements. With the software, we can describe licensing and M&A deals that we attach to our asset models to simulate the deal economics to each party over all of the development and market uncertainty that we consider. Collectively, this functionality supports a broad range of economic analyses for an asset and integrates these in a consistent and transparent manner across the franchise or company. To see how the descriptive approach used by PPFC makes modeling easier, consider how we would implement a typical piece of market dynamics. We want to create a dynamic brand share that grows from 0% to a peak of 50% over 7 years since launch. Then, after 10 years of market exclusivity, the brand share declines back to 0% over 2 years. In Excel, we would implement these dynamics on an annual basis as shown. In each year, we subtract the year of the launch to get the time since launch, and then use a formula to compute the resulting uptake, restricting it to be between 0% and 100%. We then subtract from the year since launch the duration of market exclusivity to get a year since LOE, and similarly use a formula to calculate the brand share retention. Our dynamic share is then the product of the peak share, the uptake, and a post-LOE share retention. This is straightforward, but the problem is that in complex markets, we may have to do this many times, or we need to adjust the dynamic share as additional competitors come to market. We need to make these shares contingent on success of the regulatory approval for the indication that covers this use. If we have uncertain peak shares, we must average our forecast over this uncertainty, or at least provide upper and lower bounds in scenarios. All of this effort is time-consuming and leads to an increased chance of error, such as if we miss one of the dollar signs in a formula. It's also largely wasted effort because we end up having to replicate this kind of structure time and time again. By contrast, let's see how we would implement these same dynamics in PPFC, shown here at bottom. We assumed before this that we have already defined a clinical development pathway that culminates in an approval state that, if successfully reached, means that we can launch our drug. We define a date named launch that we set in whatever diseases and segments we're modeling to be triggered by success in this approval development state. We similarly define a date named LOE that comes 120 months or 10 years after the launch date. We then refer to these named dates in a dynamic share object that we tag with a reference, say to the name of the drug and the line of the therapy. We make realizing non-zero share conditional upon approval success. Say that we start uptake at the launch date according to the provided uptake schedule that reaches 100% after 7 years, and then we lose share starting at the date LOE via retention curve that declines to 0 after 24 months or 2 years. This declaration does the same work as the Excel calculation above, but it's quicker to write and easier to understand. It's also more flexible because these objects support additional functionality that we don't use here, say to put in a delay between approval and launch, or to include patent protection through a specified date when we determine loss of exclusivity. We have now avoided the risk of misplaced dollar signs in Excel formulas simply because we've never used them. With these time savings, transparency, and avoidance of error advantages, the descriptive approach at bottom is better suited to complex market dynamics. And through the development path and other functionality to run Monte Carlo simulation that's built into PPFC, we can easily handle complex and uncertain market dynamics, say where we may or may not have additional competitors. And if we do, we can make our peak share decrease once we compete with them, or our gross net to rate adjustments or access may worsen once we have increased competition. On the prior page, we saw how a dynamic share was created using objects that are part of PPFC templates. Let's now consider the higher level structure of PPFC and see how these pieces fit together. PPFC is a module that has several submodules. PPFC templates is one of these, part of the group at left that allow users to describe market dynamics. Each aspect of market dynamics is specified by a set of low-level specifications in PPFC specs. PPFC templates contains objects that prepackage multiple of these specifications to implement higher order sets of market dynamics in a single call. At an even higher level, PPFC has a library of pre-built models that cover many common situations, say where we have a single drug to treat a chronic disease. If we have a model that can be covered by one of these pre-written models, all we need to do is populated inputs for the example at hand. If not, we can modify the description or write a new one from scratch using the modular approach afforded by PPFC templates. Most of the time as users, we work with PPFC to define the market dynamics. The other components shown here create and operate models based on the descriptions and market dynamics that we provide. PPFC functions does various low-level tasks with the heavy lifting of forecasting done by PPFC classes. This module takes descriptions of our assets, creates an asset model for it, and a simulator around that model that wraps it with functionality to manage different forecast scenarios, manage the storage of outputs, etc. Then PPFC GUI takes one of these asset simulators and automatically presents a graphical user interface to run it, optionally adding bolt-on functionality that's either pre-built into PPFC as options or that the user provides. Two final submodules extend the functionality of these forecast and valuation models. PPFC deals allows us to describe licensing M&A deals, attach these to an asset, and then simulate the economics to each party. PPFC clinical allows us to infer clinical stage assumptions by simulating digital trends of trials. Because we use a common set of classes for every analysis problem, the models that we create and their outputs are easy to integrate across the franchise or company. We can thus simulate even company-wide M&A deals or model the risk, value, and capital needs at the firm level. This descriptive approach to forecasting is a key concept in PPFC, so let's see how this is done in practice. We declare our market dynamics in a script file through code such as the declarations of the launch and LOE dates and the dynamic share that we saw earlier. We first define the inputs for our problem and the restrictions on values that we can accept for each. For example, we say that any market share has to be a number between 0% and 100%. We then describe how to map a set of these inputs to the resulting market dynamics. For each disease, we go through a natural description process as shown in the flow diagram below. We define a patient journey in which patients are placed in a prevalent or incident stock each month based on our assumed epidemiology, and then these patients are moved from this stock to others by flows. For example, a diagnosis flow that moves patients from prevalent to diagnosed, a treatment flow that moves patients from diagnosed to treated, and a first-line allocation flow moving treated patients either to our drug or to one of our competitors. For each of these flows, we describe the fractions that are moved from one stock to another as a function of calendar time or time since stock entry when we model things like persistence or recurrence. We also specify how these fractions are affected by the access decisions that payers make and by the level of promotional support. These dynamics give us patient counts in each stock that we convert to units of drug consumed and then to gross and net revenues. We calculate and subtract the cost to obtain the profit and loss statement from which we value the drug by discounting cash flows back to the present date. Once we have mapped the inputs to market dynamics, PPFC takes care of the rest. It builds the model and launches a GUI to run it. This approach allows us to rapidly build and launch models. Let's see an example of this at a high level for a situation in which we're developing an oncology drug for a lead indication to treat biomarker-positive patients in the second line. First, we specify the development path. Here we start at phase 2, and if this is successful, move to parallel phase 3 trials in the lead indication. If those succeed, we go to regulatory review and then to approval in this lead indication. If approved in the lead, we have the option to pursue 2 follow-on indications, either second-line use in biomarker-negative patients or move into the first line for biomarker-positive patients. For each option, we add a decision variable to turn on or off whether we pursue that follow-on indication. If we're approved in lead indication and decide to pursue a follow-on option, we do a phase 4 program and subsequent regulatory review before we can expand our label and use. After defining the development path, we describe the patient journey as a stock and flow process, here repeated for each segment, biomarker positive and biomarker negative. We place newly diagnosed patients in an incident stock and then make a first-line allocation to our drug product X or to another competitor. In each case, we model treatment for a finite number of months. For product X, when the course is done, we remove the patient from the simulation. For the competing first-line therapy, when the course is done, we determine whether it's been successful or not, and if not, move the patient to a second-line treatment allocation in which we can again choose product X. For each first-line and second-line allocation, we use a similar dynamic share template as we saw earlier, but tie the launch to different approval dates. Here we have a cohort-based model, which in Excel can be time-consuming to build and prone to error. In our descriptive approach, we quickly describe the market dynamics, and then PPFC takes care of figuring out when and how long to track patients in cohorts in order to obtain the market dynamics that we specify. Once we have the development path and market dynamics, we send this information to PPFC that automatically builds the model and presents a graphical user interface in which we run the model via pull-down menus as shown. We can handle a wide variety of market dynamics that may span multiple diseases and segments that could be clinically defined or geographically defined. While we run these models like Windows programs, we retain full visibility into all calculations and can plot or export the results to Excel or to any other format that we wish. As noted, these models and their results are easily integrated across a franchise or company, and by attaching deal terms or digital trends of clinical trials, we expand the functionality of these models. Let's now see how this functionality translates to the ability to address complex strategic questions. For the asset we've just modeled, let's say we're a biotech who's developing it. We must decide whether we want to pursue the follow-on indications, and for each indication, the trial design that we're going to use. We also want to compare the economic value and risk across two go-to-market scenarios, one in which we commercialize the drug ourselves, and another in which we out-license to an established pharmaco that brings synergy. First, with the default trial designs, we value the asset over development uncertainty for each alternative lifecycle management option. In each case, we decide to pursue or not pursue each follow-on indication, and then run Monte Carlo simulations over all resulting development outcomes. In each outcome, we forecast and value the asset with revenues and costs conditional upon the outcome, then average these to get the expected net present value. Here, we see that the optimal strategy is to pursue the first-line biomarker positive indication, but not the second-line biomarker negative one. With this development strategy, we can then modify the size of the phase 3 trial to see how it affects the success probability, duration, and cost. The more patients in each arm of the trial, the longer and costlier the trial, but the chance of success also rises as with improved power we have fewer type 2 errors. But this power benefit brings diminishing returns. If we size the trial to a simple rule such as 85% power on objective response rate, we'd get a small trial. In practice, we'd likely to go bigger to understand the safety profile. Here, with overall survival as the primary endpoint, we see that around 200 patients per arm, there's a maximum in the program expected net present value that occurs when the diminishing power returns no longer justify the longer and costlier trials that come from further increasing in size. Note that the location of this minimum is governed by both clinical and commercial factors. If we had a larger disease population, type 2 errors would be costlier and we'd be pushed to use a larger trial. If we were in a head-to-head race with one or more competitors, we would be pushed to a smaller trial to get to market earlier. These commercial interactions can all be handled within this integrated clinical commercial simulation approach. After optimizing the size of the phase 3 and phase 4 trials, we estimate roughly $340 million in expected net present value if we commercialize the drug ourselves. We also attach a licensing deal in which an established partner brings synergy that raises the asset by another $90 million or so. But now we only realize the value of the deal payments that come from an upfront payment, sharing of R&D costs, development and commercial milestone, and tiered royalties. We simulate and optimize the terms of the deal versus a target payment structure derived from analog deals, and then calculate the deal payments across each possible development outcome and average these to get the expected net present value to each party under the deal terms. Here, as the seller, we estimate roughly $160 million in expected net present value from the deal, but we significantly de-risk our position and reduce the capital requirements. For an emerging biotech, these are financially attractive propositions. Deciding upon the go-to-market approach, we'll consider more factors, like the broader vision for the company, and questions such as, is this drug a one-off, or would we build a larger franchise in the same disease area? Do we need the de-risked money from this deal to ensure that we can pursue other attractive opportunities? This software, of course, doesn't make these decisions directly, but it does provide a flexible environment which to understand the value, risk, and capital implications of each option so that our decisions are economically sound ones. This completes this high-level initial view into PPFC. We've prepared other presentations with more detailed walkthroughs of this oncology example and of others, such as a step-by-step modeling exercise for a drug in development to treat a chronic disease. Should you have any questions, you may contact me at kbeers@boxfordls.com. Thank you.